Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, for a new online interview here for Commodity TV. We want to now dive into the copper and strategic metals market and our sector. And I would like to speak with Craig Parry, the CEO of Vizsla Copper. Craig, greetings to Vancouver and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And what a good year it is, Tim. We're at the very start of what will be the biggest mining boom the world's ever seen. So it's a good time to be chatting for sure.
That's for sure. Before we begin, I must disclose that I'm a shareholder of your company, Vizsla Copper. A shareholder from the very beginning when Vizsla Silver spun off its copper projects and thereby created Vizsla Copper. Since then, you continued to develop your copper projects in British Columbia and have also made a significant new discovery at your Poplar project. But before we get to this, let's start maybe with the transformational deal that you announced at the end of 2025. You were able to acquire a significant development project called Palmer in Alaska and finance over $40 million Canadian. How did this deal come about, and what can you tell us about the Palmer project? Please give us an overview.
Well, look, it's an extraordinary acquisition and something that we've been looking for a high-grade development project because we've built up a team here at Inventor Capital that is a world-class development team. They're building our mine in Mexico, of course, Vizsla Silver's Panuco silver mine. We want to build a copper business, a producing copper business, and this gives us the cornerstone asset to do that. It's an incredibly high-grade deposit. It's a large-scale opportunity. There's already a large high-grade resource base there. We see the opportunity to grow that very, very significantly over the next year or two as we move towards development. Of course, there's a lot of work to do to get to that point, but the project has had a PEA on it. But what I would tell you is that, the resource base there at the moment in total is just north of 17 million tonnes at about 3% copper equivalent. There's some recent discoveries in 2023. They found some extraordinarily high-grade copper zones, intercepts like 44 metres at 8.2% copper equivalent, 24 metres at 11.15% copper equivalent, 37 metres at 8.4% copper equivalent. So extraordinary grade. And the previous explorers weren't focused on these high-grade copper zones because their joint venture partner, Dower, were a zinc smelter. So they very much focused on these zinc zones. We will come late May, June this year, have 2 rigs out there, moving to 3, drilling in and around some of those very, very high-grade copper holes. So, you can imagine how the market will react to those sort of intercepts come mid-year. There's a lot to do before we get to that, though. And, of course, you hinted there, we made this Thera discovery in British Columbia on our Poplar project, our Poplar property. That's a large-scale porphyry copper deposit. I think that it could well be one of the most significant porphyry copper deposits discovered in British Columbia in recent years. It's at that typical BC 0.4% copper grade that we've discovered there at the moment. And it's looking large, there's looking like there's multi-billion tonne potential. We think that we've identified 3 other porphyry centres. We've seen one in Outcrop, So come late this month, we're going to have 2 rigs out there. One rig's going to be drilling out that Thera discovery. I think that has very, very large-scale potential, something that will very much interest the majors. But we think that there might be, it's a very big alteration halo that you've got there. It's nearly 10 kilometres east-west by 4 kilometres north-south. We've now mapped in great detail the whole thing. We've found evidence of a porphyry copper deposit at the Copper Pond Zone to the south-west of the Thera discovery. We'll have a rig drilling the Thera discovery and then another rig out testing these other excellent targets we've got. I think that we're a really strong chance of making 1, if not 2 discoveries on Thera come February, March. So that will be very, very good news and feed into this wonderful copper market. Of course, we've seen copper juniors really taking off here in the last couple of weeks. Everyone's seen what happened with the precious metals market and precious metals companies over the last the last 6 to 12 months, and we're going to see that repeat itself in copper. So now is the time you're really seeing big jumps, particularly today, as the copper price gets well above that $6 per pound level. And I should say, I think that copper, everything you're seeing in the market today is starting to play out. That all of our thoughts around the supply-demand gap, and the reason I think that this market will be a very long-term, stronger for longer type of bull market for all metals is because, unlike so many others, of course, we had a pretty good market in 2016. We had a good market here in 2021. They were driven by sentiment largely. This market's driven by supply, demand, fundamental imbalances. And, we spend a lot of time here doing analysis on those markets. And I think if you look out to 2035, 9 years from now, this market's going to be in deficit to the tune of about 10 million tonnes per annum. You need 10 Escondidas to fill that. Well, an Escondida hasn't been found for many, many years. Filo and NGX perhaps have found something equivalent, but that's, it's going to take them 10, 15 years to bring those things on stream. So you're going to have that supply-demand gap really start to expand. And this is why I say, if you go back a couple of years ago when I was saying this $20 to $30 per pound copper, people looked at you like you were mad. Nowadays, people are looking at me as if to say, yeah, you might be right here. And certainly today we've seen $6 per pound copper. A lot of people forecast that as the high. I don't think, we're a long, long way from the high. The supply-demand gap is so huge. There was an article in the FT Financial Times last week talking about we have a systemic structural copper supply problem. There's no way we're going to be able to keep up. You're seeing writ large underinvestment in copper projects over the last 13 years of the downturn we've been in really start to play out. There's no way we can respond to the demand that is building here. And so I think you're going to see extraordinarily high copper prices. If you want to make money, buy copper companies now. Buy something like Vizsla Copper. You don't have to buy Vizsla Copper. I'll give you a good reason to buy Vizsla Copper though, but buy Vizsla Silver. Anything with a big metal budget that is currently undervalued, these things we're going to see true price discovery, not only in the metals, but also the equity markets for these companies over the next couple of years. And you're going to see extraordinary outcomes. Great fortunes are going to be made over the next few years in our space.
Okay. The funny thing is, when I did my homework here for the interview, I saw that we from Commodity already made an interview with you at the end of 2023, I believe November or December. And at this interview, you already mentioned that you believe that copper could reach the $20 mark. So you still believe, and you're still a copper bull, as I'm also. So, yeah.
I believe, I have no doubt. If you go back to 1999 when I started with Rio Tinto, the copper price was 70 cents. People, one of my most important mentors, business partners and friends, Owen Hegarty, who built Oxiana from a $6 million company to a $12 billion company. Owen, was famous for saying that he thought the copper price was going to go to $4. People thought he was mad. Well, the copper price went up 6 times to $4.60 in the last boom. This time, it's not hard to see the copper price going up 4 or 5 times to that $20, $30 per pound level. Robert Friedland's out there banging the table about that as well. Of course, Robert's, but it's not only us on the sort of sell side. It's guys like Trafigura, Glencore. You see BHP and Rio Tinto positioning themselves to get more exposure to copper. Everyone sees what's coming. And everyone wants to get set. And what I can tell you is that there aren't many projects because of this downturn we've been in. Not enough exploration, not enough studies or development work or permitting, particularly because it takes so much longer these days to permit a project. The supply response is going to lag dramatically and perhaps never ever catch up because we simply don't have the quality of projects out there to do that. So if you do have a high grade project like we have at Palmer, that's going to get developed. and going to be important to this market. But it's going to take time to catch up. So you're going to have a sweet spot over the next 5 to 10 years where supply is so constrained that the only solution will be much, much higher copper prices.
Okay, let's come back to Palmer. You already mentioned you already have a significant resource base, high grade there. If we put indicated and inferred resources together, 330 million pounds of copper, 1.6 billion pounds of zinc, lead, 30 million ounces of silver, and some gold. And the interesting thing is barite, which is important for the oil and gas industry and heavily needed by the United States. Over 4 million tons, and I believe that's really exceptionally large for a VMS deposit. So that's a already huge resource, but we would like to grow it and maybe also do some infill drilling and all that stuff. So what are the concrete exploration plans, meters and stuff for Palmer in 2026? And also, please give us a comment on this barite part, because I believe that nearly nobody has ever heard about this material. Not to mention, if anyone can even estimate what this material means for this project.
Look, it's incredibly important. So, we'll start drilling at Thera late this month through February, March. We'll be drilling at Thera. So good news flow year round, and that's one of the advantages of that Thera project. As far as British Columbia, we can drill it year round. So it's a fantastic project in that sense. We'll put 2 rigs out at Palmer come late May. And be drilling there around those very high-grade intercepts that I mentioned earlier. But Palmer, extraordinary acquisition. I think that I've been looking for a project like this for probably 10 years now. The team here, myself, we've kicked the tires on well over 1,000 projects around the world, and it's very rare to find such a very high-grade project. So it's outstanding in that sense. Unfortunately, this downturn meant that the previous owners and explorers couldn't really do everything that they wanted to do. So it's never had all of the investment dollars, all of the exploration that it really deserves. But what we've got there is over 17 million tonnes at a 3% copper equivalent grade. It's a VMS system. VMSs, of course, occur in clusters and pods. Just up the road from us, 50 kilometres up the road across the border into Canada, you've got Windy Craggy, which is one of the world's great VMS deposits, probably never going to be developed because it's in a park now. That's 300 million tonnes at 2% copper. I'm not saying that I see 300 million tonne potential here, but I definitely see 50 million tonnes at that 3% copper equivalent grade. So I think this resource is going to grow. It's strategically located. We're only 40 kilometres from Tidewater, 40 kilometres from the Port of Haynes. There's some development work going on there, examining an opportunity to develop a new port. And where does that put us? There's a couple of mines there. There's a Kensington gold mine. Hecla's got its Greens Creek VMS deposit and mine there. That's the half of, I think, Hecla's market capitalisation is based on that Greens Creek mine, which is nearby. But you're in a terrain there, a classic VMS terrain, where there's over 124 VMS deposits that have been found or VMS showings. And I think that region, and these VMS deposits, of course, are metal rich in a lot of different types of metal. And you mentioned barite there, but the other thing we've seen, that's not been looked at is that we see very high levels of gallium and germanium where they've assayed for them. And they've never assayed consistently for those metals. There's typically also indium in these deposits. And these are hypercritical rare earth elements that are so important to fiber optics and defense metal technology, defense technology. So these metals that the US needs desperately within the country. And you mentioned barite. Barite, the US at the moment, and of course barite, the main use for it is drilling mud for oil and gas. The US gets 85% of its barite from outside of the country. Here we are in a district that's got 124 VMS showings and deposits. I think that this area has the potential to become a leading supplier of critical and rare earth metals to the US internally. And being only 40 kilometres from Tidewater means that we're strategically located to be able to supply that barite to the Alaskan oil fields, but also West Coast US ports and markets. And so I think that, we've we've got good, strong support from the Alaskan governor. Indeed, the Alaskan governor, when he was asked by the White House early last year to come up with a list of projects he'd like to see supported, the Palmer project was the number one project that the governor put in his dossier to the White House. I can tell you we've been talking to people in the White House, in the Department of Energy and the Department of War recently, and I think they're starting to see our vision for a hub for supply of critical minerals and critical elements to the US out of this region. So we're looking at that. And of course, our project is the most advanced stage development asset in that area. And so I think we have an opportunity to become a cornerstone component of critical metal supply to the US right at the moment. So we're in a unique position and in that sense, with an ultra high grade deposit with extreme exploration up. Never seen so much exploration upside on a project. The last time I saw this much metal out that's sitting outcropping that's never been tested was when we went down. Mike Connett and I went down to Panuco and saw all of that silver sitting at surface that had never been drill tested down at Panuco. Well, now Vizsla Silver's, of course, in the middle of building the world's biggest silver mine. Well, here I'd like to think we're building, at some point in the next few years, building one of the world's greatest high-grade copper mines. I think it's an outstanding project. We bought it for a steal. We gave the American Pacific team a major shareholding in the company in return for that. They took all of their consideration in stock, so they're not going to be embarrassed. They're going to be major shareholders and do very, very well out of this as well. And I think the comps out there for us, Foran Mining, that's now a well over $2 billion company. My mate Steve Parsons has Firefly Metals, which owns the Ming project over in Newfoundland, similar to our deposit, a bit deeper there at Ming, but that's now a $1.5 billion company. We're sitting here with a market cap today. We've been trading very well, but we're just shy of $200 million. I think if we do everything right, we get good drill results, we continue to expand that resource over this year, we'll be fast encroaching on that sort of valuation. And moreover, if we can win White House support for an investment in the company or support for the project, then we're set to do something like a Trilogy or Nova Minerals. Trilogy here, of course, they won Department of War funding. The Department of War took essentially a 10% interest in the company and their project. When that happened, their market capitalisation over the next 2 trading days went from about $300 million to $2 billion. So if we can do all that, you'll see a complete re-rating of this company. And it's exciting, an exciting opportunity, a compelling investment thesis to get on board for that, because I think we can achieve all of the things we want to do there and see that serious re-rate to potentially $1 billion type valuation. Plus, it's an outstanding project and opportunity. And there's so much low hanging fruit there, Tim. We can, the mineralisation at this zone 1, where previous back in 2023, the American Pacific guys hit 44 metres at 8% copper. That's wide open. So, I think you're going to see some extraordinary results both from Thera and Palmer throughout this year, and a complete re-rating of the company. It's an exciting time.
So a lot of drilling to come from Poplar and Palmer. I also would like to ask about Woodgem, because there you have also a large historic resource of, I believe, 1.7 billion pounds of copper and 1 million ounces of gold. Something to await from this project also in this year, or is the focus completely on the other 2 projects?
That's a good point. We've across both Poplar and Woodgem, we've got now 4 billion pounds of copper in resources, growing all the time with that Thera discovery. We've got nearly 2 million ounces of gold in resource base now. So that that's starting to get valued correctly. And what I do note is that every sort of porphyry copper play in Canada is now starting to get re-rated, and we're starting to see those projects be valued the way they should be. So that's great news. At Woodgem, we've got some outstanding exploration targets. There's some very high grades there. I think 33 million tonnes of that resource at about 0.7% copper equivalent. But within that, there's some higher grade zones. We made a discovery there a couple of years ago at a megaton deposit. We decided not to do much more there. But now we've got, having raised that $44 million back in December, we're now in great shape to go out and test that target more thoroughly as well. And that has the potential to result in another discovery. And then, that will have value in and of itself. These porphyry copper deposits that we've got, of course, the development cost of developing a large porphyry mine is fairly significant, and that's been a problem for us. Now, the Palmer project being a high-grade VMS, much lower capital intensity to bring a project like that online. So we'll look to yield value for shareholders from those deposits that we've got in BC. And I think at some point here, and we're starting to see it now, that the majors, you're seeing Freeport, BHP, Rio Tinto, Teck, all come into the province and looking at those sorts of opportunities and projects. So they will have value. And then, of course, we've got our Copperview project, which is down next to Kodiak's Gate Zone in southern BC here, not far up the road from where I'm sitting in Vancouver now. That, to me, looks like a very strong chance of discovery. So, at the end of the year, when we sit down to do our yearly wrap-up, Tim, I'd like to report to you that, we've made another discovery or two at Thera. We've fleshed out our megaton discovery at Woodjam. We've tested that target down at Copperview, and with any luck, we'll make a discovery there. And then up at Palmer, we'll be drilling to expand that high-grade copper zone, but also testing some of these other targets. And I think we're a very good chance of making further discoveries at Palmer as well. So everything's moving in the right direction. We're growing our resource bases across each of the projects, and also out testing some of these targets with a view to making discoveries. So we find ourselves in a position where we're set up perfectly to capitalise on this market. We're well funded. We've got $38 million in the bank. We don't need to come back to the market at all. I do mention that we are looking for US government support, and perhaps that comes with some more funding there. And that will see us well funded long into the future. So we're in such great shape. It's an exciting time. I'm thrilled to have such a high grade project as Palmer on the books that we think will likely become a mine at some point over the next few years.
There's a lot of confidence into you and your projects, because you wanted to raise 25 million bucks and you ended up with 45 million. So that's a good point, yeah.
Great outcome. Look, we were knocked down in the rush there. I was very, very pleased with that. I think, me and my partners have largely propped up the company over the last couple of years. I think I've now put over $5 million of my own money into the company. So, and that's always a good sign. I did $2.5 million in this last financing. And one thing that I've learned in this business is when you see CEOs and executive chairs buying a lot of stock in their own company, that's a fair indication of what they're thinking and where they're heading. And certainly, I'm thrilled to be heavily invested in this company, and I'll continue to write checks for it going forward. I think it's an exciting time. The Palmer acquisition was transformational for us, and we're in such great shape to deliver for shareholders as we move into this incredible boom that's building at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Craig, for this insight into Vizsla Copper. And I look really forward for an update soon, maybe at PDAC in March or a little bit later here online then. And thank you very much. We keep all fingers crossed for good results. And then let's talk once more in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, tremendous, Tim. Really appreciate the chat, and go Vizsla Copper, go Copper.
Go Copper. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it. That was Vizsla Copper, which has not only one, but two or maybe three significant, well-developed copper projects and VMS projects. So more to come, not only copper. They have enough money in the bank to develop 2 or 3 projects together, parallel. And I would say the management is great. They proved in the past that they could make significant discoveries, that they can develop projects extensively, and raise enough money to get the goals done. And I would say do your own research on Vizsla Copper, and bye bye from Switzerland.